Is everyone a narcissist? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I have some pretty big topics that I want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about narcissism, addiction, and the corn with a capital P industry. So let's dive into some of these topics. One thing that I keep seeing brought up online, and I have some other videos talking about narcissism. I have a video a lot of people have said is helpful about how narcissism affects feminine energy. So I've talked about narcissism before, and I will acknowledge, like, I'm not somebody with a PhD in psychology or anything like that. However, I have in the past 4 to 5 years now done a lot of research on the topics of narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, and I've read a lot of books, I've watched a lot of lectures, I've done a lot of study about this topic because it's something that is very personal to me. It's something that has affected my life in many ways, and I really wanted to understand more about it. So the stuff that I'm talking about, some of it is my own personal experience, but most of the stuff I'm going to talk about is stuff that has actually been studied and researched by people who are experts in this field. So I'm not just making this stuff up off the top of my head. But there is a lot of criticism online I've seen of people kind of diminishing the victims of narcissistic abuse by kind of saying like, oh, well, now everybody thinks their ex is a narcissist. Particularly diminishing women's experiences as far as narcissism goes. Now, I'm not saying women can't be narcissists. However, we do know that narcissistic personality disorder, the official personality disorder of narcissism, is rampantly more common in males than it is in females. 80% of people who are narcissists are male. So if you are somebody who has experienced a narcissist in a female as far as a mother or romantic partner or a female in your life, chances are you've probably found a lot more males who are narcissistic in your life, and maybe you just haven't noticed them as much. There are arguments that say, for example, if you have a narcissistic mother, because the mother is the person you go to for empathy and things, that having a narcissistic mother may be more jarring than, say, having a narcissistic father, because a lot of narcissistic traits are a little bit more acceptable in males. Having a father who lacks empathy might feel more common, whereas having a mother who lacks empathy may be more traumatizing. So there is variation there when we're talking about these kind of things. However, when we're talking about people and their exes, and whether or not everybody's ex is a narcissist, there's a reason why more women are going to say that their ex is a narcissist than men are going to say that, because for one, men are not great at actually paying attention to cues in people, or quick to make diagnosis, or quick to analyze people's personality types and stuff, because that is much more a female go-to as far as analyzing things, thinking about relationships, analyzing relationships. Like, women are going to think about these things more than men are typically. Also, it is much more likely that a woman has dated a narcissist, like a straight woman has dated a male narcissist, than a straight man would have dated a female narcissist. It's just overwhelmingly going to be more common for a woman to have a narcissistic ex than it is for a man, because there are simply more male narcissists in the world. I'm not saying all men are narcissists. I will agree that we do tend to overdiagnose people as narcissistic in our society. I think it's it's probably a normal human behavior, because things like narcissistic personality disorder were not really discussed openly until relatively recently in our society. And then of course with social media, these things tend to get more rampant. So people are more aware of narcissism. So it's kind of human behavior to, when you become aware of something new, to try to see it in everything. So I will admit that there are a lot of people who are over-diagnosing the concept of a narcissist. Not always, and I think it's important to be aware of these patterns and these behaviors and things. So I do believe it's a good thing that we are talking about this more. I believe it's a good thing that we are actually letting people know what the warning signs are of narcissism so people can identify this. But an overdiagnosis of it is kind of inevitable. And I do believe that, like, as this becomes more normalized in society, that we will kind of like level out. Like, people will start to understand and be able to spot the signs of narcissism, but it won't necessarily be the go-to that we're kind of jumping to. That said, if you're constantly saying, oh, my ex is a narcissist, and then you date somebody else and you're like, my ex is a narcissist, you're either overdiagnosing it, or you probably have a pattern that you are consistently attracting narcissists, and it's helpful to look at that pattern. I have a video talking about how spotting red flags can be affected by childhood trauma. If you want to check out that video, that might be helpful for you. Because if you do find yourself consistently in a pattern of constantly getting involved with guys that you then realize are narcissists, you're either overdiagnosing the narcissist, which is possible, but probably more likely you are drawing in people like that because of something within yourself. I'm a firm believer that we don't blame the victim, but we also have to look at what are our patterns and what's going on within inside ourselves. And that doesn't justify somebody being abusive. It doesn't justify narcissistic abuse. It doesn't justify mistreatment in any way. But it also is, it's honoring ourselves to ask ourselves, where is this pattern coming up? And what are ways that I can actually look within myself and actually work on myself so that I don't keep attracting this pattern in my life and I don't keep getting attracted to people with this pattern. So there is an overdiagnosis, and I think if you're a woman who's like, well, he didn't call me when he said he was going to, he's just a narcissist. Like if you're jumping to these extreme conclusions, or you're jumping to things that are really just sort of like human behavior, or a man just may be irresponsible, or a man just may be, he may have made a human mistake or something. And if you're jumping to narcissism all the time and calling every behavior narcissistic, that could be a problem, and it might be something you want to work on in your own life. However, one of the things that I learned in my own research about narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder and how it manifests in the world, and I've talked about this in other videos, but I want to emphasize this, is one thing that I learned was that if someone is actively in an addiction, so like they're not sober, they're not in recovery, they're actively in an addiction, they will exhibit all the same signs as somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. So if you're dealing with somebody who is an addict in some way and they're actively in their addiction, you will experience being with them and being in a relationship with them the same way that you would somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. Now, not everybody who's an addict is a narcissist, and not everybody who's a narcissist is an addict. However, the experience of being in a relationship with somebody who is an addict will be the same as being in a relationship with somebody who's a narcissist. Part of that is because when somebody is an addict, their addiction runs the show. Their addiction will always be what they are devoted to the most. So they will never fully be devoted to the relationship. They will never fully be in the relationship, and they won't be able to actually feel empathy for you. They won't be able to connect with you in a way that a normal person would be able to connect with another human being, because their addiction will always be the thing that they're in the most devotion to. In a similar way that being in a relationship with a narcissist, like their ego is the thing that they're always the most devoted to. That's kind of what it feels like when you're in a relationship with a narcissist. Their ego is the one that runs the show. Their ego is the one that controls everything, and they're always in the highest devotion to their own ego. Again, like I said, not everybody who's an addict is a narcissist, but the only way that you will know if somebody is for sure a narcissist is if they get sober, they will still exhibit narcissistic qualities. Whereas if somebody is not a narcissist, but they happen to be an addict who's in their addiction, if they get sober, they won't exhibit narcissistic qualities anymore. It'll feel more like you're dealing with, you know, a regular person. So when you're dealing with an addict, you will feel like you're dealing with a narcissist. And this person may not have narcissistic personality disorder, but they might. But you won't know that unless they're clean and sober. And that's where it gets tricky because, again, not all addicts are narcissists. However, most narcissists are going to have a tendency to become addicts. So there is a lot of overlap that happens. And when it comes to addiction, there's so many different types of addiction. I will acknowledge that we have more resources for people who have like substance abuse addictions, drugs and alcohol primarily, than we ever have before. Like there's more avenues for people to get help for their addictions than there ever has before. It's still really not enough. And it seems like our society is becoming more and more accommodating to people with addictive tendencies, and there are more addictions out there than just drugs and alcohol, and a lot of addictions that people don't really have access to help, and some people don't even really want to accept that they need help in those areas. While addiction can affect men and women, and when it comes to drugs and alcohol, I'm not really sure what the numbers are, but I'm willing to bet that, you know, they're probably men and women when it comes to addiction, or, you know, it's a problem for both. There are other types of addiction that many people are dealing with in society today. Some of them tend to affect men more than they tend to affect women. There's obviously overlap. Generally speaking, things like gambling addictions and things like video game addictions, which yes, you can be addicted to those, tend to be a little bit more male, found in males and in young boys, whereas things like shopping and spending addictions, oftentimes food addictions and things, which those fall under eating disorder categories, which are, I believe, addiction adjacent. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're similar. Those things tend to be a little bit more found in women and young girls. Of course, there's obviously overlap that happens in both cases. I actually had somebody bring up that women were much more addicted to their phone screens and scrolling social media than men were. I'd be willing to argue that I think the addiction to screens and screen time and scrolling social media probably pretty even with both. I think probably men and women are looking at different things on social media, but I would argue that probably the actual addiction to the screen and that whatever it is on social media that is bringing people back in is probably pretty even with both. It's just a matter of like what the different things are that people are looking at on social media, but those things affect men and women. And so the concept of narcissism and things like that, and you know, people acting in narcissistic ways, being addicts and things like that, this goes for men and women, so both men and women can experience this. But one of the reasons why I wanted to emphasize this and why I think so many women are saying that they were in relationships with narcissists or saying that their exes were narcissists is because I think a lot of women are going to the narcissism argument when what they're actually dealing with is a man who has an addiction problem. And well, this can apply to any of the other addictions. Drugs, I think, are a little bit easier to spot. Alcohol, I think, can oftentimes be a gray area when it comes to people having addictions. Some people may be in a relationship with somebody who drinks and they may be downplaying their addiction. I think alcohol is something that's a little bit easier for people to kind of downplay as far as an addiction goes and things like that. However, there is a big addiction right now that people are starting to talk about, but it's not being talked about enough. It's overwhelmingly affecting males. It's seriously affecting relationships. And I don't think people are even fully acknowledging the depths of how much this is affecting relationships. So I've heard a few different estimates of this number. The low estimate, so this is like the low number, the lowest number I've heard as far as an estimate goes, is that 76% of men are addicted to porn with a capital P. I've heard numbers that are higher than that. 76% is the lowest number that I've heard. I know there's some people that are going to say, well, men can watch it and not be addicted. Not really. It's highly addictive. There are certain things that are more addictive than other things. There are people out there who can casually have alcohol. You know, people can be casual drinkers. And some people, they have alcohol, they're addicted, right? Alcohol affects different people differently. However, you don't hear about a lot of casual meth addicts. You don't hear about people that are like, I just do a little bit of heroin for fun, right? You don't hear about that stuff because those things are highly addictive. There are people who can gamble casually, but they don't get addicted to it. Stuff like porn usage, which I'm using that term to keep the social media overlords happy. Things like porn addiction are highly addictive, highly addictive. So if you are watching it, primarily as a man, you're probably addicted to it. Now, I'm not saying that women can't be addicted to it. Women can be. It's much less common in women. It's much less common for women to become addicted to it. And I'm going to dive into that in a bit. But for men, it's overwhelmingly common. So again, we're talking about vastly more than half the male population is affected by the addiction to pornography, which means if you are addicted to porn, you are, while you're in a relationship, exhibiting all the same signs of narcissistic personality disorder. Because if you have an addiction, you are going to exhibit the same signs as being a narcissist. So if you as a man are watching porn, the experience of being in a relationship with you as a woman will be the same as being in a relationship with a narcissist. So when women say that they were in a relationship with a man who is a narcissist, or like all my exes are narcissists, probably most of these women, while they may or may not have been in a relationship with a narcissist, probably their experience in that relationship likely felt like they were, because they were probably in a relationship with a man that had an addiction, very likely at least a porn addiction, if not other addictions, because it affects so many men. Again, not saying every man that watches porn is a narcissist, but if you do watch it, you probably are acting in ways that are narcissistic too, because they go hand in hand. So I will admit that for many years in my life, I kind of was brought up in the sense that men watch porn. It's normal, that's what they do. You're never gonna find a man who doesn't watch it, so you just have to put up with it and you just have to tolerate it. And I think I had accepted for many years that, like, if I was gonna be in a relationship with a guy, if I was gonna date a guy, that he was gonna watch porn, and that's just what I had to put up with. That it was normal and it was totally acceptable for men and they needed to do it and blah, blah, blah. Like, I fell for all the lies. The more I have been doing research about this, and the more that people have been talking about porn addiction, and the more I'm actually like learning about it and understanding about it, the more I'm realizing that it is at the root of so many problems that we have in society. And it's actually so disturbing, and it's actually frightening that more people are not talking about this. And it's probably because it's being highly censored, which is why I have to call it porn. So before I get men that start getting really angry at me and start claiming that I'm just attacking men or that I'm vilifying men in this situation, I want to make it very clear that I absolutely believe that this addiction, probably every addiction, but speaking of porn addiction specifically, I actually do believe that men are victims of this. I think men are victims of this culture because the average age that boys are exposed to pornography is 11. Now there are people who are going to say, well, that's the age that men start exploring their sexual feelings and things. It's kind of the start of adolescence and things like that. Fair enough, but it's still very damaging for boys to be exposed to something like porn at that young an age, because it screws them up in so many ways, and I'm going to get to some of the side effects of it a little bit later, but it gives them a very false perception and a very twisted idea of sexuality. And there's a lot of research that shows that the age that boys become addicted to porn, which again, average age 11, actually stunts their sexuality. So it keeps their sexuality as an adolescent boy. I know this is going to be controversial. The fact that so many adult males are fighting so hard to justify their attraction to underage girls, and why we're seeing so much of that philia, so to speak. Again, I'm trying to use the proper terms, but we're seeing so many men who are preying on underage girls. A part of that, I know there's men out there who are going to argue it's biology and things like that. It's very likely somewhere around age 11, 12, that's where that boy's sexuality, like that's where it was stunted. And when you're 11 or 12, being attracted to a teenage girl is not odd, right? It's not unusual. I mean, that's the age when you're kind of like noticing when you're attracted to someone and when you're not attracted to somebody. And that's kind of the age when boys and girls are starting to kind of notice each other and sort of, you know, notice the world around them and the things that they find appealing and the things that they don't. Like, those things are normal. But when you start introducing something like porn, it actually ends up stunting a boy's sexuality and his sexual maturity to the point where he then always remains attracted to what he's attracted to at that young age. And he doesn't actually mature past that. I don't really know how to talk about this specifically without using words and saying things that probably will get me kicked off social media. So I'm not going to go down that road. And you can probably figure out where that goes, right? The correlation between now sexually, this boy is stunted at like 11, 12 years old. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that the average age that girls start dieting is age 10. So if you think about it, like that's the age that the media and the world is now like targeting people to get women feeling bad about their bodies and to get men focused on objectifying women. Now also, when you get young boys hooked on porn at that young an age, oftentimes it desensitizes them, right? So if you're watching, you know, maybe it's something that's just, I don't want to say innocent because I don't think porn is ever really innocent, but it's something that is more just sort of your basic run-of-the-mill porn, right? Eventually that is going to not feel like enough. And they've actually done research studies that show, particularly with males, is it affects them greater than it affects women. Men are more exposed to it, but it doesn't affect women the same way. I will actually get into that in a minute. But they've actually done research that shows that males who are exposed to porn over time will get desensitized and will constantly need a more, because it's addictive, they'll need more of a dopamine hit. They'll need more, like something edgier. They'll need something more dramatic, which is why eventually, and if you start at a very young age and you're continuing to watch porn over the years, you're gonna constantly need to up the ante. It's like any kind of addiction. You're gonna need to up the ante for something edgier, for something more hardcore, something that is more taboo. You're gonna constantly need to up the ante. And I'm not trying to kink shame anybody. Like, you know, people have different kinks and preferences and things like that. And I think, you know, once people are adults and everybody's consensual, you can do what you want. But oftentimes it skews people's sexuality. And I think there are a lot of people, particularly men, who end up with very extreme sexual tendencies, and they've actually researched that when men actually get in recovery from porn addiction, that over time they realize that these extreme tendencies, like this extreme hit of sexuality that they need in the extremes of, oftentimes with men it tends to be dehumanizing women or some kind of like extreme sense they need as a higher dopamine hit, eventually their sexuality starts to go back to what their normal state would be. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it always has to be a vanilla sex type situation, but they'll go back to more of their normal sexual tendencies. So that oftentimes when men are into these very extreme situations, as far as their sexuality goes, it's usually because they've become so desensitized to what they've been watching in porn over the years, that doesn't do it for them anymore. Because again, it's like any other addiction. You get used to something at a base level and then you have to up the ante. You gotta get a bigger hit, you gotta get a bigger dosage, you know, you gotta go something more extreme. They haven't done those research studies as much with women. I think that does affect women to some extent, but not as extreme. They have done research studies showing that if a man is in a relationship with a woman who he was attracted to, who he's interested in, who he loves, who he's had a sexual relationship with, the more that he gets exposed to pornographic images of other women, the less he is physically attracted to the woman that he's with. Even if nothing about her has changed, he loses attraction for his partner. So if as a man you're watching pornographic images or videos of other women, you are losing attraction for the woman that you're in a relationship with. When they did those studies with women and showed women these, you know, pornographic images and things like that, it didn't affect women as much. Women were not less attracted to their partner when exposed to these things. So I'm not endorsing watching porn for anybody, but the studies are showing that it doesn't have as deep an effect on women as it does on men. Women are less likely to be addicted to it. Not to say that it can't happen, and I don't encourage women to get involved in it because I think you're better off without it. In the same way that I would say, like, there are people out there who drink and they drink casually and they don't become addicted to it. But would most people's lives probably be better if they didn't drink alcohol? Probably. Like, alcohol's not really good for you. I know people will make arguments about it, but like, generally speaking, it's not good for you. But it's much more damaging for some people than it is for other people. And so I think with women, porn usage is similar in that sense where it's not beneficial for you, but like it's less damaging for a woman typically, unless you actually do develop an addiction, which some women do, but it's less common with women than it is with men. I think also too, and I'm not going to dive into this too much, but I think if you actually dive into the world of porn and how it's made, again, it's one of those things where like you don't want to go into the sausage factory and know how the sausage is made, because I mean, some people wouldn't care, because I think oftentimes people that are addicted to porn actually dehumanize the people that are involved in it, so they may not care. But I think there's a lot of people who, if they really knew what went on behind the industry and how people were actually being treated in the industry, they'd probably be appalled. I've always found the porn industry to be really ironic because the primary consumers are males. The people that make the most money, now granted, female porn stars make more money typically than male porn stars, which is one of the few industries where that's true, but also the people who create, produce, and distribute porn make the most money out of everybody. And it's men who are the primary consumers. Yet the women that participate in porn are the ones who typically are shamed the most and have their lives the most affected and potentially ruined. Even if they do make a lot of money, you know, they oftentimes become shunned from society. I got through watching the Secrets of Playboy documentary, which I don't think is the exact same thing. I think things like Playboy magazines and nude magazines, I think is kind of like porn adjacent. It's obviously not as sexually explicit in a lot of ways, but I do think that they're connected. So I'm not saying it's the same thing, but if you actually watch Secrets of Playboy and you actually see the consequences of a lot of women's lives who simply posed nude for a magazine that was, you know, considered an iconic magazine for decades, still had their lives ruined because they chose to pose nude for a magazine. So you can only imagine how badly women's lives can be destroyed by actually doing porn. In fact, I actually heard a story online, I don't remember who the creator was that I heard this, but they said that they knew someone from their high school who had, she, you know, kind of was down on her luck for a while, she needed money, and she ended up making a couple porn videos and then realized she just didn't want to do it. She got out of the industry, she tried to get on with her life, and video of her ended up online and she could never take it down. She could never remove it. She never made a massive amount of money. And, you know, basically that, like, you know, most women who get into that industry, while there are a few women who get into that industry who end up becoming celebrities and stars, and Tracy Lords and Jenna Jameson, they end up having mainstream celebrity success. That's very rare. That said, most women are not going to get incredibly wealthy and incredibly famous doing porn, but there's a very, very high chance that their lives are going to be destroyed by doing it. And again, I'm not encouraging women to do it. I don't shame women that have made the decision to go down that path for whatever reason, because I find it very disturbing that we specifically shame women for being a part of that life when it's men who consume it and also primarily produce and distribute it. And we don't shame the men that do that, but we'll shame the women who are a part of it. And that's like a whole other discussion in itself. But the exploitation of the industry alone should be enough reason for us as humans to say we're not going to consume it. But unfortunately, it is addictive. So there are a lot of people who are going to consume it anyway because they're addicted to it. And unfortunately, part of the addiction process, particularly with men, is it dehumanizes women. They actually have done a lot of studies that men don't see women as human. They see them as sex objects. And I talked about this in my video talking about Megan Fox. Oftentimes men, if they're sexually attracted to a woman, they're not able to also accept that she is intelligent or funny or has a great personality, because it means that they can't dehumanize her. And oftentimes men are programmed from such a young age through porn usage that in order for them to get sexually aroused, they have to see a woman as being solely a sex object. So if they have to humanize her, it actually, it can affect his performance. He may not even be able to perform. And there's so many links to things like ED. There's so many aspects of all kinds of male sexual disorders, like that are actually, you know, affecting his health or the health of his sexuality or his ability to perform, that are connected with porn usage. So for example, physically, a man is used to watching, you know, a woman on a screen or in an image or something like that and simply taking care of himself. He gets used to there being that barrier between him and an actual woman. So when he is in a situation with an actual woman, oftentimes there's a problem there. Oftentimes he can't get past that because he's not used to the stimulation of an actual woman, which goes into actually having physical dysfunctions. And we're seeing more sexual dysfunctions in men than we ever have been before. And it's interesting how I've seen people online who talk about things like porn addiction, and that's the thing that men will push back the most. Like, no, I can still perform. No, I can still perform. Well, maybe you physically can, and this obviously doesn't affect 100% of men, but my guess is probably most men that are addicted to porn are not going to be able to perform as well. Now, I've heard men argue about this, and I will tell you that even if you are physically able to show up and perform, you probably will not be giving the woman as good an experience, because for one thing, one of the aspects of porn is it tends to be there solely for the entertainment of men. So it is not really about female pleasure. So it trains men to see sex as being for their pleasure and not for the woman's pleasure. And in reality, if you want to have a good sexual experience, obviously both people should care about each other's pleasure. However, I'm not going to dive too much into female sexuality here, but Women in general have a much deeper capacity for sexuality than men do even. But unfortunately, most women have sort of accepted the idea that they have to show up and perform sexually for men. They oftentimes block their own pleasure because they don't know how to tap into their own pleasure. They're typically not going to be with men who are actually concerned with their pleasure. So as a man, if you're showing up in sex and you're just showing up for your own pleasure, using a woman for your pleasure or expecting her to show up for your pleasure, that woman will not get pleasure from pleasing you. As a man, like if we're actually talking about masculine feminine polarity, and this is deeper than I'm going to get into in this video, but if we're actually talking masculine feminine polarity, a man showing up for a woman's pleasure is going to be pleasurable for both. A woman showing up for a man's pleasure is only going to be pleasurable for him. That's completely oversimplified, but generally speaking, that's what's going to happen. So if a man is showing up just for his own pleasure and expecting a woman to show up for his pleasure, the woman is not going to be satisfied. Whereas if a man is showing up for a woman's pleasure and he's giving her pleasure, because as the masculine, you're the giver, as the feminine, she's the receiver, then you're in sexual polarity and you're probably both going to get pleasure from that. Again, I'm oversimplifying here, but generally speaking, if a woman is feeling like she has to show up for a man's pleasure and she's trying to give him pleasure, she's now in the masculine. She's not getting the depths of pleasure that she needs. And most women have kind of just accepted the fact that they're never going to get the depths of sexual pleasure that they actually need and crave, because most women are totally cut off from that. They're not taught about their sexuality. That's a whole rabbit hole in itself. I'm going to get into female sexuality and how this affects that in a minute. Eventually, women are just going to decide not to have sex with their partner because women are not going to end up finding it satisfying, because sex then becomes about just what they can do for a man. And I gotta be honest with you, this happens a lot in relationships as a woman. It's gonna sound horrible, but most women, again, are doing in relationships all the time. And not to say that men don't do anything in society today, but men are doing less in society today than they ever have been, and women are doing more in society than they ever have been. And at a certain point, women are gonna get to the bedroom and they're gonna be like, I don't want another job to do. And they're gonna end up giving up, and that's another contributing factor to sexless marriages, because you have men that are being trained to show up in sex as, well, I need a woman to perform for me, because that's what they're seeing in porn, because that's often what happens. And it's also very superficial. For most women, shallow, superficial sex not going to work. It might work temporarily, but eventually a woman's going to need more. She's going to need more depth. Typically speaking, in sex, men are looking for quantity, women are looking for quality. And if men are used to just the superficial experiences of a woman showing up just to please him, like what happens in porn, you're not going to have true sexual polarity, and the woman is not going to have the quality and the depths of the sexual experience that women often need. As women, again, there's factors like women need to know what to ask for. Women need to know how to connect to their sexuality, but women don't learn that from watching porn. So men are learning very shallow, superficial sex from watching porn, and women are learning to not ask for that and to just show up and perform for men. So most people in general, if they're learning from porn culture how to be sexually intimate with each other, are actually not acting in polarity, and they're not acting in a way that, they're not showing up in a way that is actually going to be sexually satisfying, particularly for a woman. And as a woman, you're not really gonna know what to look for, what to seek, what to ask for, how to explore yourself. I mean, there's so many aspects to porn usage that just make it so that people's sexual experiences are just gonna be shallow and superficial, and they're never actually going to be satisfying. They might be temporarily satisfying for a man, but they're probably never gonna be satisfying for a woman. Again, if you think about it, as men, it kind of trains them to hurry up and get it over with. Because for most men, watching porn and doing what they do with porn is considered a shameful activity. So it also associates sex with shame. And for men, it's like, we got to get it over with fast so I don't get caught. So it actually encourages men to hurry up and get it over with, so that it actually is preventing many men from actually having, like, they don't get to have a fully fulfilling sexual experience with a woman because they're still associating sex with shame. There's so many levels to it that are making people's sexual experiences not really fully pleasurable. Like, it may actually satisfy men in the short term, but it's not going to be sexually satisfying for a woman typically at all. And it's not going to be sexually satisfying for most people either men or women in the long term. And I would also say that, and I have a video talking about women and sexuality, I have a few videos talking about that actually. One of the problems I think that happens in our society with men that go to porn usage is because it starts to normalize in their minds any expression that a woman has, maybe of her sexuality, or even physical touch or intimacy, or any kind of expression that a woman may have of even closeness or something, as men going directly to sex. Because in porn, the woman shows up and she's like automatically sexually available, which definitely diminishes a man's incentive for foreplay and things like that, which most women need way more of, like way more of. But that's, again, that I think that goes into like the depths and the quickly trying to get it over with, stuff like that. But porn does train men to see women as always sexually available, and any kind of connection that a man and woman may have, oftentimes men go to, this must be a sexual connection. I actually, this was so many years ago, like long before porn addiction was something that anybody even talked about. I dated this guy that very obviously had a porn addiction. It did not last very long. It was amazing because like I knew he watched it a lot, and I think I was young enough and dumb enough to kind of think that, oh, okay, maybe this is just normal or something. Like I didn't really know any better. But like if we were to sit down and like watch a regular movie, his brain was always like, well, when are they gonna have sex? And it's like, well, this is Spider-Man, dude. Like, that's not where this is going, right? Like, he couldn't understand why, oh, well, they kissed. Why aren't they hooking up? Like, his brain would always have to go to something being sexual, right? Because I think it normalizes that. So I think oftentimes, like, I have a video actually talking about physical touch and the love language physical touch. I don't know if I actually touched on that in that video, pun intended. But one of the things is I don't necessarily believe fully in the love languages, and I know a lot of people are saying that it's just a made up thing or whatever. I do think there's some validity to it, but I don't live my whole life by it. But I would say, if as a woman, if something like physical touch is something that you value, which a lot of women do, it's actually really frustrating because as a woman, if you try to have physical touch with a man, oftentimes the man will immediately take it to sexual. So as a woman, if you're like, sometimes I just want a hug, or sometimes I just want somebody, like I just want to feel skin to skin contact, or sometimes I just want to feel some kind of like touch, oftentimes the man will immediately switch it to sexual because he's been programmed to think that any kind of physical expression from a woman is automatically got to go to something sexual. Whereas in reality, I think there's a lot of men out there who actually crave physical touch in a sense that is non-sexual, but their brain automatically goes to making it sexual. And I think, generally speaking, as a society, I think more people need things that are sort of non-sexual touch, like just to be able to hug someone and have it not immediately go to something sexual. I think that's something that men and women are craving. And the fact that we've created this like corn culture of like anything, any kind of physical expression from a woman automatically becomes like an indication that she's ready for sex, I think is actually hurting both men and women in that sense. And it also forces women to either shut down or exploit their own sexual energy because it becomes so normalized. And I have a lot of videos talking about like the good girl, bad girl dynamic. I actually mentioned that recently in my Beyonce video. Oftentimes, you know, men will do it, society will do it, women will do it to ourselves and to other women, is, you know, women are expected to be either like the good girl, like the good wife, the virginal woman, or like the bad girl, the slut, the whore, the, you know, the one that is willing to exploit herself. And in reality, most women are never going to be fully satisfied in either of those categories. And in reality, most men are not going to be fully satisfied with a woman in either of those extremes. The problem is that something like porn usage actually encourages that idea that there are good women and there are bad women, and the good women are the women that you marry, but like you're never gonna feel a full sexual connection with. The bad girls are the ones that you're sexually attracted to, but you could never actually make as a wife because they're not pure and virginal enough. Like it actually moves that divide, when at the end of the day, for most women are going to be at their best when they can fully connect with and explore their own sexuality while also being able to have boundaries and hold their body in a high enough regard so they don't share that sexuality with just anybody. And that's how most women are probably going to be at their best. Most men are probably actually going to have the most fulfilling relationship with a woman who he can see as a sexual being, who he can have a sexual relationship with, but also knows that this is a woman who holds herself in a high enough regard so she's not going to be exploiting her sexuality for everybody in the world. I mean, that's probably what is the healthiest for both men and women when it comes to a woman's connecting with her sexuality. Unfortunately, the porn culture really teaches women that you're either the good girl who doesn't have the sexual urges, who is fully cut off from her sexuality, or you're the bad girl that explores her sexuality, that will exploit it for male pleasure, but like you're not really gonna be in a relationship with someone because like you're just the fun plaything, right? Like it's the virgin whore, wife, mistress, good girl, bad girl dichotomy that like porn culture absolutely perpetuates. It also massively encourages women to, on the one hand, shut down their sexuality to protect themselves, because if men are walking around with this addiction to porn, they are actually learning how to exploit, objectify women. Women are going to now shut down their sexuality because it's not going to feel safe. So women are going to feel the need to protect themselves. So oftentimes they'll shut down their sexuality so much, and women shutting down their sexuality can have serious health issues for women themselves. And again, I'm not encouraging promiscuity, but I'm saying a woman completely shutting herself down from her sexuality, she's also shutting herself down from sensuality, creativity, just pleasure and joy in life. She also is going to have a really hard time having a beautiful sexual relationship with a chosen partner, because women are feeling like, I have to completely protect myself because any sexual expression from a woman immediately gets objectified and exploited by men. A woman will immediately feel unsafe because men are in this constant state of lust because of their porn addiction, that women, many women, will be trained to just like shut that down and close themselves off from having, again, any joy, pleasure, sensation, because it's always going to be seen as being sexualized by men. On the flip side, some women will go in the opposite direction and will choose to sexually exploit themselves, which is not typically a true expression of a woman's sexuality. It's a big misconception when people talk about things like porn as being like liberating for women, because often that liberation is really just a woman exploiting herself for male validation. It's not a true expression of a woman's sexuality, because a true expression of a woman's sexuality is going to look very different than the kind of things that you see in porn usage. I actually do have a video talking about porn and body image, and I talked about this too, and I talked about my natural versus fake video and the concept that I really do believe that what's happening right now, celebrities in Hollywood are absolutely trying to make themselves into porn stars. The lips, and now if somebody has naturally full lips, more power to you. Like if you have naturally full luscious lips, it probably fits with your face shape. It probably is something that is just a beautiful feature that you have. But if you are a woman who is constantly getting injections trying to make your lips look bigger, you're trying to make your lips emulate other lips to try to make your face look, you know where I'm going with that? I think most people do. If you don't, God bless you. If you have the fake, they don't look like real. Fake boobs do not look like real boobs. I can tell you as somebody who has grown up with these my whole life, the fake ones don't look the same. They're not the same thing. Growing up as somebody who was very well endowed and seeing women with fake boobs constantly exploiting their boobs, it only perpetuates this idea that women with boobs are just sex objects. But also, when you have this fake beauty, which is really a very plastic beauty, and that's what becomes sexualized, and in reality what we have are, you know, all these celebrities that are trying to emulate porn stars, and I know people don't like when I say this, but they're trying to look like sex toy blow-up dolls. That's really what they're trying to look like. And when that becomes the beauty standard and the beauty norm, what you're actually doing is you're saying that sexually the beauty standard is essentially a porn star, and you're normalizing that, which I really do believe is actually normalizing fake women. we're trying to like eliminate a natural woman, like a woman's natural beauty, and create a fake image, because the beauty standard is something that is not found in nature now. Like our beauty standards in society are absolutely things that are not found in nature, which is a terrifying place, because basically we're putting fake women up on a pedestal. Now I realize some of these are real human women, but it's normalizing it for men to be attracted to women who are completely fake, which opens up the door to things like AI porn. And I know people are going to argue, well, at least women aren't actually being exploited when they do AI porn, but all the same damage is going to be there, and it's probably going to get worse, because the AI porn, they can justify doing a lot more explicit things with that. It's going to keep the dopamine hit. It's going to make men see women more as objects, because again, they're now used to being sexually attracted to objects. And I know when I talked about sort of Kylie and the AI connection and things like that, I had a lot of women that were like, oh, men don't need help learning how to objectify women. They do that naturally. I don't actually believe they do that naturally. I believe that's porn culture. That's actually them being addicted to porn, and it makes it normal for them to objectify women. I really do believe that that's what this is, and it's been getting worse over the years. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to pit men and women against each other, and I think there's a lot of podcasts and the things like that that are trying to kind of condition young boys to see women as the enemy or women as the bad guys. And I think there's a lot of men who are like, well, I don't care if women get sexually exploited. I don't care if women get objectified. I want to objectify them, whatever. I don't care if we make women into AI and we just glorify them. And I don't care if women are completely fake and that's the beauty standard. I don't care about any of that stuff. I think it's sad if you're a man and you think that way. But that said, if they can eliminate women and just make AI women the standard and kind of eliminate the need for women, they can do that for men too. They're gonna do it for women first. I think they're tricking a lot of women into thinking that it's empowering us when it's actually not. I've literally just touched the surface on all of the dangers and damages that porn does. I have another video where I talked about this. This is from a while ago. I'll try to link it to this one. In things like porn, it actually normalizes not seeking consent. Because if you think about it, I mean, I don't necessarily think that there's a script necessarily, but when you're actually, you know, making a porn video, it's like, okay, you're going to be in this position, then you're going to be in this position, then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, right? So everybody's kind of like aware of, I mean, generally speaking, I'm sure that there's probably some like surprises and things like that that happen. But generally speaking, and then there's like lighting, and then there's like, let's stop this and make it look like this. The expectations for what sex is supposed to look like is completely different. I use the argument in the other video. I think that it's kind of like the difference between like the WWE and a street fight. Like porn is kind of like the WWE, right? Like it's choreographed. It's people that have planned this out. Some of the acts that they're doing are not even actually real. I mean, some of it is actual sex, but some of it is actually not like real life scenarios, and they actually do all kinds of things that I'm not going to get into in this video to like make things look more exaggerated than they are. Whereas if you think about it, like actual, like a sexual encounter is a little bit more like a street fight. Like it's all kind of improvised, right? It's like two people who are just kind of trying to figure things out as they go. I've heard from a lot of women that talk about experiences of guys that they found certain sexual positions or certain sexual acts, which I'm not going to get into detail here because I don't want this to get too graphic, but certain sexual things that you can't just spring on a person. You can't just, but like in porn usage, these women probably know that this is going to happen. They can act like surprised, like, I didn't know he was going to do that. But in reality, like, they knew, and they were ready for it, and they were prepared for it, and they were lubed up and whatever, like, and everything. And so they did know it was going to happen. But men see that and think, oh, it's normal for me to just do that to a woman and go ahead and do it, and I don't need to ask consent. I don't need to make sure she's prepared. I don't need to be safe and careful. And oftentimes women particularly can get very hurt. Like, you can actually do a lot of damage in a lot of these situations. I mean, emotional trauma, but also physical trauma as well. And porn usage can normalize those things. I mean, I could just go on and on and on about all of the negative effects. I mean, body image expectations, and I think this goes for men or women. It's just generally speaking, I think it's more focused on women. It normalizes so much of this behavior, and it's so damaging, and there's really no positive to it other than short-term gratification. This is something that is rampant among males. I'm not saying it's good for women, but porn addiction is rampant among males. It's a normalized thing, and I think there's a lot of, I even see women out there who defend men's usage of it or say, I like to watch it with him. Do you? Do you really? Are you really okay with a man watching this stuff and actually getting sexually aroused by another woman, especially while you're there? Maybe you do. I would suggest that if that's something that actually is your thing, you may have some stuff to work on within yourself. Or maybe you're just justifying it because, like a lot of women, and I was like this before, you're just accepting that that's something that you've been told all men do and that that's what they have to do or whatever. And I know there's going to be plenty of men that are going to be like, you don't know what it's like to be in a male body, so you don't understand. Yeah, you're right. I've never been in a male body, so I don't necessarily understand, but I have been in a female body, and I have dealt with a lot of men that had a lot of addiction problems, but also a lot of men that have had porn addiction problems. And I can tell you, it's not a pleasant experience as a woman to be dealing with a man like that. And he's probably going to exhibit a lot of negative behaviors, physical, emotional, and he's probably going to exhibit the signs of being a narcissist, because that conditioning of objectifying women is going to separate him from having any empathy for a woman, because she's an object. Why would he empathize with her? And he's also going to always prioritize that addiction over the relationship. I've seen so many women that have been talking about, you know, having a husband with a porn addiction, and men will be like, well, maybe if you were putting out, and the woman's like, I was ready. I wanted to have sex. Men oftentimes, when they have this porn addiction, often, again, they lose interest in their partner because they become addicted to the women on the screen. And it's not because the women on the screen are better than the woman that they're with, but it conditions them, it lures them away. Now, I know there are a lot of men out there who carry a lot of shame around this topic, and like I said before, I think men are victims of this addiction as much as women are. You know, women have to deal with a lot of the consequences, but I definitely think that men are being introduced to this stuff younger and younger. I do think that it's probably part of a bigger manipulation because, you know, hey, when anybody is addicted to something, they become much easier to manipulate. And, you know, it actually makes a bigger divide. It destroys women's body image. It destroys sexual intimacy between men and women. And it actually does destroy intimate relationships. And I think if you destroy intimate relationships, you break down the family structure. I mean, there's so many consequences to things like this when you do have somebody in addictive behavior. And I'm only focusing on the porn, but as I mentioned before, any kind of addictive behavior is going to destroy relationships. And that goes for men and women. So if there is anybody out there with an addiction problem, I highly suggest you get help. If you are in a relationship with someone with an addiction problem, please understand that it is a painful thing to deal with. You are not alone, because a lot of people are suffering with this. I can't tell you what to do as far as, you know, being in a relationship, but I would say if you are in a relationship with someone who is an addict and they are not willing to get help, you really need to seriously consider what steps you want to take in that situation, because it is an incredibly painful thing to deal with. And I want you to know that you're seen and acknowledged. I don't have a definitive answer to this, but I do really want this message to get out there to more people. I want women to understand that you do not have to tolerate being in a relationship with a man who is addicted to porn, and that being in a relationship with someone who's an addict is going to feel the same as somebody who is in a narcissistic abusive relationship. It's going to be painful. Like, being in a relationship with someone who's an addict is painful. I want men to know that, like, you are victims of this, but once you're an adult as a male, you can be empowered to get through this. There are men's coaches and there are men's groups that will help with this, because there are so many benefits for men to breaking their addiction to porn. And I want to see men do better. I didn't make this video to be like men bad and women good. I want to see men and women do better. I want to see people in healthy relationships. I want to see men get help. I think it starts with men getting help. I think as women, I think we need to accept the idea that this is a damaging thing. I would encourage women to not participate in this behavior in any way. I'm not telling women to shut down their sexuality. I'm not promoting purity culture by any means, but I do think that if you are a woman who is actively in porn culture, I think it's incredibly damaging. It's going to be damaging for you. I have other videos talking about how being in that world can destroy women and give women a very warped view of life and men and things like that. So I'm not gonna dive into that here because I'm sure this video is long enough. But I want women to understand how damaging this is, and also that they don't have to just sit back and accept that this is just what men do, because it's going to be damaging for you. as well as for him. And I want to see men get help and do better. I firmly believe that 100% of men that use porn are not operating at their full potential. And I honestly want to see men operate at their full potential. I want to see men be better, and I want to see men be great, and I want to see men do great things. I don't talk about this because I want to hate on men or shame men or suppress men. I care about men's mental health. I care about men's place in the world, and I want to see men do better. I want to see men step up and be the protectors and providers in society that they're meant to be. I want to see men step up and be leaders, but they're not going to be able to do that with a porn addiction. So I want to see men be better and get the help that they need in that area, in any area, with any addiction or any mental health issue. I want men to get help. I want them to reach out and get help. I want to see men do better because I think it's better for everybody. You know, I think as women it's better for us because it'll be a safer world. I think it's better for children because I think you'll get better families, and you know, I think it all snowballs from there. So yeah, this was a long video and I really just scratched the surface of things like porn addiction, but I hope this helped you understand why you may feel like so many of your relationships have been narcissistic. I hope this helps you understand some of the damaging side effects of things like porn addiction. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If there's any other aspects to this video you'd like me to expand on or do any follow-ups or anything like that, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I love to hear from you and I love your video suggestions, so keep them coming. If you're interested in any of my online courses or my guided journal, details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.